Good morning, Dragon Slayers. Joined today by my favorite power couple, Jessica and CJ. Um, you've been introduced to both of these folks before. Today we're going to talk about something that I think has had some degree of currency: longevity, biohacks, how to get there, how to stay there. Um, we're dealing at this stuff at two different perspectives. One among the very old, I represent that position, and one among the those on the younger end of the spectrum. Uh, I will offer whatever wisdom I can, but I also invite some of the new research, and those of you who know Jessica in particular know what a great student she is of life. Uh, so let's talk about the biohacks in particular. First, let me ask you two, what energizes you? What keeps you going? What keeps you healthy? What are the principles by which you live?
I think the basics are our principle. We're very data driven people. So, diet and exercise, is the foundation. One thing we discussed coming into this podcast is that one of the kind of red herrings, if you will, of biohacking or of, trying to optimize for being as healthy as possible is that it's easy to get sucked into various social media trends or various, oh, this supplement, changed my life or whatever. And maybe it did, right? Like, no shade at any of that stuff. I take plenty of supplements, but if you aren't covering your bases first of like the foundational things like just eating clean food, exercising regularly, then your supplement is going to kind of fall on deaf receptors, to butcher a phrase. So I think for us it just starts with having consistent healthy habits first, and then after the train is rolling, then you can say, oh, we should make a small adjustment here for this extra thing. I know in my case, I am aggressively ADHD, if you couldn't tell by how fast I talk. Um, and I'm taking a variety of supplements and medications for that just so I can, live a life in the society that I live in and, have a job without it melting my brain, being able to focus and concentrate, being aware that I'm talking too fast and slowing myself down so people can, understand what I'm saying. I also have a family history of Parkinson's disease. And so those are two kind of major niche cases that apply to me in particular. And there are specific practices, specific supplements I might take to address those, but those don't apply to everyone. Whereas everyone should exercise regularly, everyone should eat a clean diet all the time, right? And after you've covered those basics, then you can specialize for yourself after the fact. But I think if you specialize without covering those basics first, you're putting the cart before the horse.
So, if I may comment on this, I am very aware that both of you are incredibly bright. And in CJ's case in particular, I think one of the things we're working with you on is to improve the signal to noise ratio.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's an awful lot of processing going on. Let's distinguish what is of value from what's not of value. The other point I think you raised, which is to embrace and understand one's genetic legacy. Um, we all die. We have family members who have died, and we can dread that or learn from it. And I think one of the things that's really important to understand is that your family legacy is not necessarily a script, it is a possibility. And then you have to contend with that possibility. Uh, from my own perspective, I look at longevity in terms of what we avoid and what we seek. What we avoid are the toxins in our environment: stress, hurry, accidents, stupid stuff like on riding on a motorcycle at 90 miles an hour without a helmet.
Yeah, motorcycles are really stupid. That is a
He
big
was
one.
specific. He said like 90 or more miles an hour.
Yes. He only did 88,
Riding recklessly on your motorcycle.
Oh, okay, okay.
and he knows exactly what he's doing. Okay. Um, so all of those things make sense. I think we start with basics, though. Some of the basics that I like to start with is understand that for us to live a long time, we must sometimes do less of things. We need time, particularly for our brain to function, for autophagy to take place. That is, we need time for the system to destroy dysfunctional cells. And we get there by fasting. Doesn't have to be too deep of a fast, but I would suggest that each of us has the capacity to fast for 12 hours within 24. That is, leave your last meal at dinner, eat nothing else, fast in the morning. Uh, there's nothing compelling in adults about the importance of filling yourself in the early morning with breakfast. Uh, I've learned for years to get by on this stuff that looks a bit like urine, but it's actually green tea.
Seems like you're drinking pickle juice, and I was going to say, is that a new biohack? Is drinking pickle juice the biohack of the day?
Oh no, no! This is actually, uh, in fact, I'm doing product placement here of something that I not necessarily want to endorse, but this is actually spaghetti sauce in a jar. And what I do is I buy the jars, throw out the spaghetti sauce, and use the glass for my green tea. There are no such things as cups in my house. We've got recycled glass containers, right? Okay, so fasting's important. And I think we need to be aware of all of the seductive messages we have out there in the media that undermine our health. I'm a film buff. One of the things I did at Stanford while I was trying to get my my graduate degree in anthropology in my spare time was I was a bit like you, Jess. Took on an awful lot of obligations.
Oh, yeah, too many hobbies that are actually not hobbies.
Mm-hmm.
But I was interested in film production because I was doing a lot of educational TV. So I took some courses in the Stanford Film School, and I love film. I mean, if you can get me to talk at hours about classical films, but if you look at some of the great film eras in our culture as things evolved, the period between the late 30s and 40s, the war years, even beyond that, were very productive in Hollywood in terms of creativity. But in terms of role models, these guys really went south.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, virtually, and one of my favorites when I was growing up, uh, and I was trying to learn how to attract a beautiful woman like Jessica, I had no clue. So I had to watch movies, and I was this geeky kid that attempted to model himself based on the movie scripts of Jimmy Stewart and Cary Grant. They were, very decent role models, and I'm sure it was kind of a stretch to approximate what they were doing. But I did learn something about wit. But what I noticed about the films, even in those days, is that virtually all Hollywood stars did product placement with tobacco. And then at the same time, when I was growing up, we were inundated with ads from the food industry about things that ultimately would kill us. And that's still out there. Uh, the beautiful people are drinking beer, eating pizza, going to McDonald's. Kids are demanding this. McDonald's even has this seductive game of giving kids these stupid toys to get the kids hooked on going to McDonald's. And I've never met Ronald McDonald, but I'm sure he probably is closely associated with the Pillsbury Doughboy in terms of his level of fitness, given all the crap that these folks are eating. So you've got to be able to avoid the addictions.
You do. And I think that's getting harder and harder. I think part of the challenge that we have now is that food scientists working for large companies, large corporations, or even private food science companies that then sell their services to whatever, I don't know, chip company is buying, are finding ways, they're also finding biohacks, and they're finding ways to keep their companies alive. I read somewhere recently that at one point there was research done that when chips are crunchier, we eat them more. For whatever reason, a crunchier chip makes us consume more chips. And then products responded by making their Doritos and whatever other chip you enjoy crunchier. They had a higher crunch, whatever products they put in. And they're not using the same ingredients that we're using in our kitchen. They're using products that we can't pronounce, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you've never taken a science class and you can't pronounce all the ingredients on the back of your food, that's okay. You don't know how. That's not your area. But they're also using food that isn't really food anymore to make their chips crunchier so we consume more. And I think now we're hitting this point in society where Ozempic came out. Ozempic is a magical drug for a lot of people. And they take Ozempic, it helps them with weight loss. And now food science companies are trying to find ways to hack around Ozempic. So the food advertisements are one piece, but then the chemical composition of the food, they're using neuroscience hacks to make us eat more. And they're using science that we're using for weight loss to make ourselves healthier and finding routes around it so that we're being hacked on all sides at all times.
Back to Ozempic or the equivalent. Uh, so that's an easy fix. We don't have to worry about anything once we got that, right?
Yeah, totally. Once you take Ozempic, you're on it for life. You never come off of it, and your problems are solved. As long as you are also working with a nutritionist and maybe finding a new exercise regimen, and perhaps working with a psychiatrist like Dr. Tom to help answer questions that you might have, then you're totally solved. Everything is good.
Okay. Uh,
No new problems ever.
so the next thing I would encourage people to consider, I did not obey this morning because I was trying to prep for this podcast. This is a beautiful day, by the way. This is the day that those of you who don't know anything about Western Nevada, we're not Las Vegas. We're close to the mountains. We've got the best of all possible worlds. We're not far from the People's Republic, so we can enjoy the Sierra without having to be destroyed by California politics. One of the great things about today, this is the first day of real spring we've had, and I know we're going to meet afterwards, but for sure, one of the things that I'm sure all of us are going to be doing as much as possible. Well, you guys are going to catch a plane pretty soon, aren't you?
We are.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But normally, I think the routine is to go out and hike a little bit in the morning like this. Take a walk in the sun. Sunlight is great for you. Protect your face if those of you who are fair skinned like us. But it's great to get out there in the open sun. Very healing. Daily exercise is incredibly important. We were meant to run, to move as much as possible, get to the gym, challenge yourself with both strength training, endurance training, and skill building. I was remarking this morning about what I'm missing in my own workout routine. And CJ, you might be interested in this, but when I was a kid, I boxed. Fortunately, I didn't make that a career, but the I'm reminded of Mike Tyson's quote about martial arts. Everybody has a plan until they're punched in the face for the first time. But what I did enjoy about boxing is hitting the light bag, and I miss that. I think the rhythm of skipping rope, of hitting a light bag, is something really important that if I can get back to that, that would really be critical for me.
It's also important for bone density. One of the challenges that women face is starting in our 30s, we lose bone muscle, or lose muscle density, and we lose bone density all throughout our lives. So starting when I think you turn 30, activities that help with bone loss and with muscle loss would be things like contact sports. So if you're running, every time you hit the ground, it encourages your muscles and your bones to stay dense and to be strong. You have to do weight bearing exercise, and you don't have to have big manly muscles for that muscle density and for that muscle growth to cause health effects. You can have dainty muscles. You can look like a dancer or a Pilates instructor and still have good muscle tone and growth. But I was actually told once by somebody that when you're doing kickboxing in a class, you punch and you don't hit anything. And it does not encourage the bone growth. But if you're hitting a bag, if you're hitting a small bag or a large bag, you have that repercussion and that increases your bone density. So even if you aren't hitting someone else and you're hitting a bag, you're still encouraging bone density and you're encouraging your ligaments and tendons to be more resilient. So even if you don't actually want to become a boxer, just going and boxing and practicing that skill is good for your bones.
I agree entirely. I think if you can do that, and just the idea of hitting a bag with full force with proper form, which, as CJ knows, as I even go through the motions right now, the primary activity, ironically, is in my thighs and calves.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So you're pushing off as you hit the bag. So, that also induces coordination. Skipping rope, I love because, again, you're doing kind of light bouncing. And the other thing that I think makes a lot of sense is dancing. If you can figure out what I used to do when I was competing as a runner, I would take a break on occasion, and I had a little mini trampoline in my house. And I loved music, and I would just turn up the stereo and dance on the tramp to improve coordination and also to get more spring in my step and so on. Okay, what don't we eat? What should we avoid?
Fast food, highly processed food, food that does not have identifiable ingredients in it. If you look at something and you can't tell what it was made of, and you didn't watch it get made, the chances are that it will outlast the apocalypse, and that doesn't belong in your body. Often, you can eat anything that you want in moderation. So everybody knows that alcohol is a toxin. It's not good for us. People can drink alcohol and be fine. People can also overdo alcohol and be aggressively not okay. But that's true of all food. If you put something in your body that someone else might say, oh, I would never put that in my body, that's not good for me, and you do it once a week or once a month, you're probably fine. As long as you're also getting a rainbow of colors in your plate. When you look at your food, if you can identify that's a vegetable, that's a starch, that's a protein, you're probably on the right road. But if you start eating things that come exclusively from the freezer section, you're probably eating too much sodium. That's not good for you. It probably has preservatives in it, which if you have chronic migraines like I do, might be contributing to those, might be making it worse.
If you have chronic what? I didn't hear you.
Migraines. I have chronic migraines, and I finally figured out how to not have migraines every weekend. And a big part of it was I had to eliminate some foods from my diet that made me inflamed and puffy and miserable, and that would trigger migraines. And one of those for me is high sodium foods. So everybody else can eat whatever they want. But if I eat chocolate or high sodium foods or dairy, I'm going to get a migraine within 3 days. Everybody's system is built differently. So you have to figure out what works for you.
So you listen to your body. Uh, Let me put a plug in here for the microbiome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the microbiome is critically important. What's that? Well, we're talking about the colonies of bacteria that exist in our gut that are really important for our existence. And one of the things you need to look at is as you look at better living through chemistry and put that into your gut, if the microbiome can't make sense of the stuff that you're putting in your gut, that could just well stay around for a very long time. So think of things that are edible that have the capacity to spoil, because that's what we really should be eating. That is, it needs to be ultimately degradable. And so you choose those kinds of things. eat things as close as possible to traditional paleo thinking. What we're talking about paleo thinking, where were we for, say, the million years or so of primate evolution that became human beings? Well, we got by likely on game, fish, roots and tubers, and fruits. Only recently on refined grains. So if you want a diet that makes sense, I gravitate towards squashes, toward healthy roots, sweet potatoes, yams, and so on, greens, and then meat, fish, and so on that is not infected with various kinds of toxins or antibiotics. You have to be very careful in selecting that stuff.
One of my favorite sort of layperson pieces of advice for food was just avoid the middle of the grocery store. Go to the grocery store, but only stay on the edges and don't go down any of the aisles. And most of what you'll find is actually on the right track.
That's certainly not a good thought, right?
Yeah, I mean, if your food can spoil at room temperature, the chances are it is a fresh, biodegradable item, and that belongs in your body. And if your food is shelf stable for many, many years, it means that it's probably higher in sodium than you should be eating, so you should eat it in moderation. And it's probably got preservatives in it that help keep for a long time. There is one exception. Well, it's not really an exception. I think it depends, but on the gut microbiome, I found some information that people who have chronic migraines or issues with their gut microbiome, like I have, should eat fermented foods. And I don't mean you should drink vodka. I mean you should be eating things like kimchi and sauerkraut or sourdough. And that I would call that a biohack. I would actually put that in the category of that is a biohack.
No, I'm right with you on that. If you can get a hold of some good sauerkraut,
Yeah.
kimchi, uh, if you've had decent, probably you'd have to make it at home, sourdough bread, uh, and you don't have to be gluten sensitive. That can be very helpful.
Yeah, and there are places where you can buy it locally. You can buy it in your grocery store. My favorite sauerkraut comes from Grateful Gardens, which is a restaurant here in Reno. It's the best sauerkraut I've ever had. It's amazing. Whenever I go there, that's all I want to order is something I can put sauerkraut on. And then we've recently been eating way too much takeout, but it comes from a Korean restaurant called Coco's Korean. And I would say probably two of the items in their bowls. There's kimchi, and I have no idea what it is. Honestly, I think that it is fermented jicama, but I refuse to find out how to make it at home, so I haven't looked it up. But those items, I feel wonderful afterwards. If you find places where you can go out to eat that make really good whole foods and you can identify all of the ingredients if you're trying, and they are fermented and they're delightful, it's a great way to introduce more of those things into your diet.
I also want to talk a little bit about supplements. By the way, if anybody would like to know something about supplements, you might want to take a look at this book, Dragon Slaying, which has the Amazon gold seal on it right now. But in the book, we have a chapter called Biohacks, where I do kind of a cursory review of common supplements. But let me just talk about a few of them that have been reasonably well researched. One of them is this. You don't have to get this particular brand, but acetyl-L-carnitine alpha lipoic acid. Bruce Ames was a scientist at UC Berkeley and did studies before you guys were born, actually, on aging rats. And he fed, no, correction, mice. He fed one group of mice diets high in enriched by acetyl-L-carnitine and alpha lipoic acid. Remember those two, acetyl-L-carnitine, alpha lipoic acid. He discovered the mice that ate that kind of chow were far more likely to be preserved in terms of their cognitive functioning than mice that didn't have that in their chow. They've been tested time and again, and it is probably an anchor item that you might want to include in your diet if you wish to be cognitively enhanced. I've been using this stuff for years, And I think it's proven helpful. That's one study that has been validated. Two, nicotinamide riboside, NAD. If you can find it, get a pure supplement for it. It's been well established that that too can be cognitively enhancing. Three, psychoserine is a lipid source that, I'm sorry, phosphatidylserine is a lipid source that is also known to be cognitively enhancing. It will preserve brain function as much as possible. Those big three are critically important. You might want to look at gotu kola as an additional stimulant. Ginkgo biloba has some supporters and others. Do the research, look at the studies. I tend to want to look at basic research and see if long-term studies validate the use of many of these supplements. The other one that comes to mind is S-adenosylmethionine, SAMe. SAMe actually has potency as both a cognitive enhancer and has the power of many antidepressant drugs without the cost. It is such a powerful antidepressant that it's capable of inducing hypomania. A caution about SAMe, as it is in addition to all these other supplements that I just mentioned the last minute or so, is make certain that they're sourced from a responsible lab or company. That is, they need to have the stuff in it that they advertise. When SAMe was first achieving some degree of popularity about 20 years ago, everybody and their brother was marketing this stuff, only to discover that relatively few brands of SAMe, Nature's Made in particular, had quality assurance to determine that there was adequate amount of SAMe in the supplement represented. But do your research, think carefully. There are a number of gurus out there that have, I think, good research behind what they're saying. Dale Bredesen comes to mind, Peter Attia, and others, where you can follow up on current thinking about research on biohacks. But I will tell you that even those gurus out there would diminish in their own mind the importance of these supplements because it pales in comparison to the steps that we've already talked about. Diet, exercise, having meaning in your life is critically important.
So before we move on, I have a question for you, Dr. Tom, that I think everybody would get massive benefit from that is listening. When I started seeing you, one of the things that you had me do was we discussed my DNA and we discussed where I'm from in the world. And we actually did a few tests for it. We did some labs. And after that, you looked at my labs and you put me on L-methylfolate and magnesium threonate.
Right.
And for those of us who aren't doctors and aren't medical professionals, can you explain a little bit why having a doctor do those tests and provide that insight would be helpful? Because those are not things that I was taking previously, and they're available on Amazon. I could have been taking them the whole time. Why did you have me start those?
Well, I guess the first question is the selection of a physician. Make certain that you have a physician that is aware of current literature about these issues. The issue that we were talking about right now, the genetic predisposition to ineffective folic acid, and the backstory is this. Those of us that have some Northern European heritage, for whatever reason, are predisposed to a genetic mutation that does not permit us to convert folic acid to the business end of folic acid, which is L-methylfolate, which has activity in the brain. And if you endure life without adequate L-methylfolate, again, the active part of folic acid, you risk heart disease, cancer, dementia, depression, and so on. So what's really important to me is to identify those people that are genetically predisposed to have this deficit. I personally have that deficit, and I personally have a family history of Alzheimer's dementia. And my sad story is I had a very intelligent, charismatic mother, and my dad was a primary care doctor. And my dad was a pretty old-timey guy, and we shared that background. Both CJ and I have physician fathers, and my dad would regularly choose to supplement patients who are experiencing low energy after getting adequate lab studies with vitamin B12. Now, vitamin B12 supplementation can partially compensate for the deficits associated with L-methylfolate. My dad didn't know about L-methylfolate at the time, but he regularly gave my mother B12 injections. My dad dies. The B12 injections stop. My mother's mental health and cognitive functioning declined precipitously. I asked my mother's primary care doctor about the emergence of dementia, and he denied any awareness of this in my mother. And ironically, both that doctor and my mother were in the same convalescent care facility with Alzheimer's disease a few years later, which is a bit sad.
That is sad.
For both. Uh, so, we've looked at aggressively looking at L-methylfolate in particular as a way of reversing that. When I discovered that whole issue relatively early in my life, I was aware of this, began supplementing myself with L-methylfolate, and the rest is history. So far, I've been able to dodge at least the full ravages of what my genetic legacy is. But, who knows? A lot of that is, a function of aggressive discipline. Of course, I'm sure, well, you guys are 2 generations away from me, but your grandparents, my parents, were not as vigilant about health issues, prevention issues as we are today.
I think one of the struggles that we have today now is the amount of research that is coming out and that you have to try to interpret. So there's always a new news headline on what to take. Sometimes it will be things like throughout your skincare routine and use beef tallow. And then all the dermatologists are offended and are like, no, beef tallow doesn't work. It's not harmful though. You can try it if you want. And then there's other research that comes out that says things like women who take 1 to 5 milligrams of creatine per day are less likely to have dementia and to have muscle loss. So women who take creatine age better. That's kind of challenging to interpret.
Actually, that's true of men as well.
I believe that it is, but I don't care about men. So, but I think that there are so many studies that are always being thrown out there that if you're not a scientist and you're not a medical professional who has a background in understanding and interpreting the data, and I say this with just a little grain of salt, it's very easy to make data misleading. So when we're making presentations in business, you can look at data and you can interpret it one way and leave something out because it doesn't serve a message that we want our stakeholders to hear. It's so much easier in science when people don't understand the science that they're reading. So when you don't actually have a background in interpreting medical science research, it's really easy to get overwhelmed and confused. So to be honest, when Dr. Tom told me to take L-methylfolate, I didn't look up a single thing. I said, yeah, sure. Because Dr. Tom is a medical professional that I trust and he does the research. And there are a few online resources that when they do the research, I know that I'm going to listen to them and it's true. But then there are other things like large podcasters that I don't really want to name that have sponsorships. And those sponsorships pay to have research done. And then you get mass, like what is AG1 is Athletic Greens.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Athletic Greens, I took Athletic Greens for probably a year and a half. And then CJ looked up some research and found that maybe it wasn't actually adequately supported by scientific research. It might have just been really marketed very well by some good podcasters. And I took it out of my diet and I noticed no change. but there was technically research to support it. Mm-hmm. So, Dr. Tom, when you're looking at research, you have the educational background to understand it. But what would you say for people that maybe don't?
Actually, my best friend in research is Google Scholar.
Google Scholar. Google Scholar, yes.
So what I will do is, if I'm interested in an issue, I will try to type in what I think is a reasonable question, like, okay, phosphatidylserine supplementation long-term impact on cognitive functioning. Are there any studies, and I haven't even done that particular search, but if there are any studies on something such as that, or S-adenosine-methionine, impact on depression and cognitive functioning. Common question, statins. Do statin drugs have a positive or negative impact? A lot of controversy about that. But one of the things that we've learned about statins, ironically, is that one of the primary justifications for taking statins is not necessarily heart function, although it may help, but brain inflammation. Taking statins decreases the possibility of brain inflammation.
So, pause. I don't think that everyone knows what a statin would be given for. So could you give us a little background on statins? And then I think I have a biohack related to this if you're trying to avoid getting put on one.
Statins, drugs such as Lipitor, Crestor, and others are commonly used for people who have a genetic legacy of elevated bad cholesterol. And what it does is it helps shift the metabolic balance away from the bad cholesterol toward the good cholesterol, if you will, high density lipoprotein. That's one of the things it can do. It can also decrease coenzyme Q in the system, Q10. So it does have some liabilities. And one of the problems with taking statins without supervision, if you don't monitor CoQ10 or you don't supplement with CoQ10, you end up with problems such as muscle pains, neuropathy, and so on. So it's a careful balance. But one of the positives of statins is that when we look at it long term, there's less likely to be the kind of brain inflammation, maybe perhaps related to microvascular effects. That is, you're less likely to have the long-term impact of brain destruction associated with diseases such as hyperlipidemia or even hypertension if you use a low-dose statin. But again, that must be balanced by an adequate supply of both CoQ10 and turmeric. So,
and turmeric. I'm glad you said that. So turmeric is maybe one of the original biohacks that came out of the internet. People were taking massive amounts of turmeric, and someone recently drank a turmeric latte and found out that turmeric is staining. It does actually, it causes some staining, if anybody needs a heads up on that. But how much turmeric do you need to take?
First of all, I would honor what I would say people from the subcontinent would do, and that is I do use a lot of turmeric in my cooking, period. But if you want to take a supplement, I imagine there are readily available turmeric capsules that are helpful. The form of turmeric that is perhaps most powerful is thera-curcumin, Thera curcumin, which has one of the most powerful antioxidant effects going. You can find thera-curcumin online. It's relatively expensive, but I think it is a biohack. It is the way to go.
So another biohack that CJ and I have been trying out often is hot and cold therapies. And I was told recently, about a year ago, by my primary care physician that if I didn't lower my unhealthy levels of cholesterol, I was a candidate to be put on statins. So I took that seriously. I increased my cardio. I already eat a pretty clean diet, though, so it was really challenging for me. I had to cut out pretty much all baked goods, no croissants on the weekends. I stopped having bread. I already had kind of stopped having bread, but I stopped a lot more. But I have also been joining Dr. Tom at our gym in the hot sauna. So there are steam saunas and then there are dry saunas, and I personally use the dry sauna. But I believe that there are a lot of benefits to sauna health wise, but I shouldn't talk about them. Dr. Tom, what are the health benefits of sauna?
It's a stressor. It's a controlled, manageable stressor. Uh, it also has antiviral properties. Essentially, when you're in a hot sauna, you're inducing a fever that will kill viruses. So there's some value there. Uh, the one caution about saunas, make sure you're well hydrated.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think a regular challenge with a hot sauna, or if you can tolerate it, I have some difficulty with it, would be a cold plunge. Again, extreme temperatures will challenge the system. It's an adrenaline surge. So when I swim in a moderately cold pool, it's cold for me, although initially painful. That is, I don't like that. I'd rather be swimming in, Mediterranean warm waters. Ultimately, you get through that first surge, and it's probably very healthy for you.
So I've been doing the sauna regularly. We have a friend who is always in the sauna. Whenever I go to the sauna, we run into him there. He had a heart condition.
This is Bob the Meditator.
Yeah, Bob the Meditator.
Bob the sauna spirit.
Bob
yeah.
lives in the sauna. For a while, I just thought that Bob never left the sauna because I only ever saw him in the sauna. And he would be in there for an hour.
It's a great place to pick up chicks.
Maybe not at our gym. But the sauna, he was doing it for his cardiovascular health. He had an episode, he had some major open heart surgery, and he has reversed his condition with a healthy diet. A healthy diet is key, and exercise, but he also spends a lot of time in the sauna. And I have blood work coming up to check in to see if my diet, exercise, and my regular sauna usage have reversed my cholesterol issues. Because all things being equal, I believe that there's a genetic component for me. My family does have a history of high unhealthy cholesterol levels. But I'm hoping the sauna and taking red rice yeast is going to help turn that around, and I won't have to be put on statins, which can be hard on your body. But CJ is a cold plunger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm one of the weird ones. I've done both. I'm a fan of both, but my resilience to heat is lower, which I'm going to anecdotally credit to my Germanic heritage. But yeah, huge fan of cold plunges. Jess got me a cold plunge for Christmas that we can use. Had some friends.
You have a cold plunge in your house?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, technically, it's on our porch, but yes.
Yes. No, and it's not complicated. It's, a rubber tub with a PVC frame to it that you fill with cold water and stuff.
So the next time I come over, I could probably, prior to dinner, do a cold plunge.
Yeah. No, I encourage everyone to. I still haven't gotten her dad to do it, even though.
And both of you know CPR, right? You can get me.
And my mom will come, so she's willing to crack some ribs if she has to.
Mm-hmm. So I guess
it doesn't have to be that cold, though. To be fair, the cold plunge doesn't actually have to be icy enough that it's painful and stops your heart. Mm-hmm. Some people prefer it that way.
Yeah, I've based on my own research, the colder it is that you can tolerate, the greater the benefit. But on the flip side, I've almost cracked my skull open in the shower trying to take cold showers, because if you're in a warm shower and then someone on the internet recommended just flipping it all the way to cold, right? You need the maximum cold for the maximum benefit. If you're not accustomed to that, then your body's immediate reaction to sudden cold is to go into shock, right? You lock up. And I felt myself about to pass out, and I was standing up in a shower. And if you've ever slipped and fell in a shower or lost consciousness, you understand what the risks of that are. So there are physiological consequences. It's not something that you can just dive right into. So I think there's benefit to starting off with, uncomfortable but bearable cold, and gradually making it colder, gradually staying in longer. But to that point, are you aware, Doc, of any short-term or long-term risk factors for cold plunges that people should be careful of?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and one of the things I was about to say is the caution for those of you in the audience that are on my end of the age spectrum. The challenges of many of the things that we're just talking about, extreme heat, extreme cold, is cardiac arrhythmias. And you're more likely to suffer these the older you get because the heart seems to be less resilient to these kinds of stressors. And you don't want to push yourself into a cardiac arrhythmia with this. So I would proceed with caution. It's like as we escalate our exercise, again, review that with your physician. And I think one key point is that anyone in middle age or beyond, and you guys are not quite there, but your parents are, and that is, should be doing a regular consultation with a cardiologist because that still is the highest percentage of medical deaths in this country are related to heart disease. So we do all we can to prevent that in advanced age. And some of the heart problems that are challenging us, and particularly after the COVID pandemic. The COVID pandemic has seemed to have done a number on us in a variety of ways, but in older populations, there's a much higher rate of cardiac arrhythmias coincident to COVID. So that also needs to be scrutinized.
So, when you're trying to take on something new like this, the modification is obviously the most important factor. You have to modify whatever your biohack is for what you're capable of. I am not capable of the cold plunge. It's not for me. But what I do occasionally, when I'm up for it, do is I'll take a large bowl and I'll fill it with ice water and I'll put just my face in. And the benefits are probably not as great as a full cold plunge, but I do notice it'll help me with lymphatic drainage, it'll help me with puffiness, and it triggers the mammalian reflex, which is kind of my dad's gold standard for biohacks. But if you're telling someone who is new to sauna or new to cold plunge, what would you say? Start with 3 minutes, start with 2 minutes, do it every day. How would you modify if you're just getting into it?
Well, Jessica, I think the first issue is on any of these adventures, particularly as you are at an age of risk, I would find a good, sensitive physician who's willing to listen and willing to join you in a partnership. Key point, not an authority, but a partnership to go on this fitness adventure. So before you undertake this, I think it is worthwhile getting a screening cardiology consultation, or at least having somebody do a rhythm strip, an EKG, to determine if there are risks, and then see what the impact has been. Try it, see what happens. These wonderful Apple Watches, there's an illustration, makes everybody a cardiologist. I mean, you can actually check for cardiac arrhythmias. You can monitor your pulse. What's it say right now?
Not as low as I'd like.
Usually it's pretty low. I'm sure it is for you as well, CJ. Uh, so, okay. But I think all of that gives us sufficient information to help guide us and listen to our body, see how we respond. Well, is there anything else that either of you would like to say in closing before we reconnect? You guys are going to go on your own personal adventure, so I'm not going to be able to see you until next week. But anything you'd like to say in closing?
Oh, I have one. You said that you have an Apple Watch. I got CJ, who also has an Apple Watch, an Aura Ring. Well, the Aura Ring, I have small wrists and it hurts
Oh,
if I wear something on my wrist. So to anybody who maybe has arthritis in their wrist, I have tendonitis from everything, tennis and working and all of my hobbies. But there are now wearable devices that are very small that you can also get similar benefits from. And I read a study that your sleep is less impacted if you wear a small wearable ring than if you wear an Apple Watch. The Apple Watch will track your sleep, but one, it needs to charge a lot more often, but also it can interfere with your sleep if it snags on the pillow or it hurts or whatever the reason may be. But a smaller device can provide the same benefits. And there are a few out there that have been on the market long enough that we don't really need a bunch of research to say, does it take your pulse? Can it tell if you're asleep or not? You don't need to wait for long studies to come out for those products. You need to know.
But it will talk about sleep efficiency as well, right?
Yeah, but this is primarily for sleep. I got it to help me with sleep. It is probably not the best activity tracker, but I don't need it for that. It does count steps and it does help me with that. It also helps with cycle tracking for women. And if you're worried about anything in that category, having a wearable device that takes your temperature every night and measures it without you having to think about it is something that can be a huge benefit. So I guess my closing comment would be, whatever your biohack is that you're looking into, there's a way to modify it and make it apply for you. The market is really doing wonders with new products, new availability, how to get something shipped to your house if you don't want to go to the store and find it. There's always an article you can find. And if you have a trusted doctor like Dr. Tom, then they can help reality check you on things that are maybe not real and things that are.
So those of you who are out there that have endured, I hope, appreciated this performance, this presentation. We wish you well. We look forward to seeing you next week. And for both of you, safe travels until we catch you again. Be well all, and goodbye.